you see on the picture there is Mandy Stevens. And what I'm going to talk about today is an excavation that Mandy herself undertook in 2008. And the work that I'm going to present here is largely her own. She did an awful lot of post-excavation analysis and interpretation, and was fairly close to publishing this excavation before her untimely death in 2016. For reasons that were become obvious, the site was too important not to publish, and so Geraldine Stout and myself took up the challenge, and we were able to publish the full excavation report this time last year. So the story here begins when Meath County Council decided they wanted to expand their water treatment plant, and so a rescue excavation took place precisely on the footprint of the future facility. And what was found was this remarkably complex palimpsest of six serious phases of occupation, dating from the Mesolithic to the post-medieval period. Now, the prehistoric period didn't leave any physical traces, but there are Mesolithic flints and later flints that were discovered in the process of the excavation. But what particularly interested me were the two early medieval phases of occupation, the early medieval enclosure, which you see here illustrated in blue, and the later early medieval post-Viking settlement that you see illustrated in green. Geraldine Stout was particularly interested in the area you see there in orange, which represents a Cistercian Grange. And then there was also later medieval settlement and then some post-medieval settlement. So I can begin. For the prehistorians amongst you, I'm sorry, I'm going to ignore the flints. But let's begin with what I believe is the most important part of this excavation, and I would hope it would be the most controversial part of this excavation because there's an awful lot of uncertainty. But what Mandy was able to do through remarkably careful recording and through an awful lot of radiocarbon dates and very nicely stratified finds was to tell the story of this oval enclosure that you see here. An oval closure that was divided by a wall, a rather flimsy wall, but nonetheless the enclosure was divided into two. And you can see that on the north, let me think now, we're talking about the northwestern side, there was an area of paving. So it's just on the surface of this, you might consider we're talking about an enclosure which served a number of functions. The finds, well, in particular, the most important find is this piece of amphora that was dated to the late 5th or mid-6th century. So it is a high-status early enclosure. In the report, I have, using the work of others, of course, have shown that this type of amphora are mainly, but not exclusively, from early medieval ecclesiastical sites. Not exclusively is an important part of that sentence. Then there is this iron stylus, which is a rare enough find on Irish excavations. This is an indication of literacy, The iron stylus is used to write into wax tablets, and the broad end, the pointed end writes on the tablets, and the broad end erases that writing and flattens out the wax. Now, that's the sign of literacy, which again causes us to consider, or to, causes me, I guess, at least to associate this with perhaps a literate ecclesiastical site. But styluses or styli are not exclusively from early medieval ecclesiastical sites. Okay, so there is some ambiguity about the exact nature of the enclosure, but it does lend itself to think of it in terms of an ecclesiastical site. This illustration here shows you a couple aspects. It shows about the distribution and the date. The site was securely dated to the early 6th century, but there are radiocarbon dates which reach back into the 5th. So we're talking about a very early site. It is a high status literate foundation. As I say, it need not be ecclesiastical, but it makes sense for it to be an ecclesiastical enclosure because it's exactly where you would expect to get an early church site. This is the epicenter of the missions of Palladius and of Patrick, and the sheer weight of other geographical distributions, whether that be the distribution of Downach townlands, Stock townlands, as you see here. Stock meaning the house, an early reference to the house of a saint. The distribution of Roman finds. This is where one would presume to find the origins of early medieval church, the arrival of the early medieval Christian church. So, if it is an ecclesiastical site, then it has parallels with some of the better known sites you see here, particularly Inishmurray and Riusk. And although we did not find, although no church was found, the site was incredibly, because of the long-term occupation on the site, that would have been quite a miracle to find the remains of an early wooden church. Yet we find that the site, as I said, was bifurcated, and there was a more business-like end on one side, and what I'm suggesting there might be a church, what might originally have been a church on the other. And if it is a site, then it is one of the earliest early medieval ecclesiastical sites ever excavated in Ireland, which makes it a very important place in the history of Irish Christianity. It precedes Carrowlahillan in Kerry, which I've always felt was an unlikely place to have the earliest known church in Ireland, but I have to admit that Carrowlahillan has the church and the founder's tomb. So these are tentative. Must remain a tentative observations or conclusions, and the book does go to some the conclusions. The discussion in the book does go to some effort to try to weigh up all those different factors that I just highlighted here. The second of the early medieval phases is a post-Viking phase, which has a souterrain, with a 9th century, late 9th century, 10th century date, as you would expect from a souterrain, and its demise or an abandonment sometime in the 11th. It has, one of the features in it is the reuse of millstones, And that's kind of, that speaks to me about the secondary nature of souterrains as they are often found on early medieval sites. There is also an intense industrial activity is taking place in this later phase. And I think what is particularly important is that Fiona Beglane identified a skinned cat from Stalleen. Here we have in microcosm the same type of archaeology, the post-Viking archaeology that was found at Knowth, where you have unenclosed settlement, where you have souterrains, and also a skinned cat, which to my mind speaks of an urban sensibility, perhaps a harsher society, and I think represents the rupture that was brought about by the Viking invasion in this part of Ireland. The cultural rupture discovered at Knowth probably applies throughout the Boyne Valley, because the Boyne was the focus of every one of the 4 long generations of Viking terror, including the 40 Years' Rest, the so-called 40 Years' Rest when it comes to this part of Ireland. And that is I believe, well, I had no doubts about the discoveries at Knowth, but it's nice to see in microcosm that change in society extending across to Stalleen. Then we get to the bit that enticed Geraldine Stout to get involved in this project, and that is that Stalleen was known to be a Grange of Mellifont Abbey, and is recorded as such as early as 1185, and of course it's also recorded in the post-dissolution documents. And in the early 1185 reference, it's called Chalk Lenny, the house, the house of Saint Lenny. And there is some discussion in the book about the nature of this person. But there was some uncertainty about. I should also say that the Stalleen is recorded in the dissolution documents, and it was one small part of a 22,000 hectare estate belonging to Mellifont, which left a settlement which had settlement implications right into the medieval and into the post-medieval periods. But Stalleen was a townland of almost 300 hectares, and one could never be certain about where the Grange belonging to the monastery, belonging to Mellifont, was precisely located. But there was some hint, because there was a well near the excavated area called Tober Sanmana, the well of the monks, which is a nice indication of that the monks were nearby. And the other thing is that the excavated site is serviced by a little stream which runs even in the driest weather. Like it never went dry in 2018, for example, and it would have been a perfect stream for which to put on to build a horizontal mill, which would have, for which you would have had the stones that were later incorporated into the souterrain. But it was thanks to Mandy Stevens' excavation that we learned of the precise location of the Grange, because she found the gateway tower to the Stalleen enclosure. And this is a very important discovery because there have only been to date, there have only been 4 Cistercian granges excavated in Ireland. And so any information we can get on this important aspect of medieval settlement is really worth pursuing. It was a rectilinear enclosure, I suppose roughly a square enclosure, which measured 64 meters in diameter. And in it, because it only just caught the edge of the enclosure, that we didn't find any, I should say, Mandy didn't find any evidence for internal structures, but she did find the bone of a barn owl, from which we like to think there was also a barn. But that's, again, that can't be certain. But there is, without question, this wonderful gatehouse. Now, stone gatehouses are a feature of granges in Ireland that we know from historical sources and that we know from some evidence on the ground. We know that the Stalleen enclosure is similar to those to the other Grange sites that we do know about in Ireland, Ballinlig being one of the best examples of a site that belonged to Boyle Abbey. And you can see from this illustration that we have Ballinlig, we have the enclosure at Knowth, and the projected size of the enclosure at Stalleen. And like the early medieval inferences, this is a very small portion of an enclosure, and so its precise size remains uncertain. But gates, like you see here, that's incontrovertible evidence that this was a well-defended enclosure, and gatehouses are a feature of Cistercian granges throughout Ireland and throughout Britain and Wales, or Britain, I should say. And we have gatehouses, a very fabulous example of a gatehouse belonging to a Cistercian grange in Bullock in County Dublin. But Mandy Stevens's favourite parallel for the gatehouse that she discovered was the small gate at Darver Castle, or similarly the gate that was found, the Sheep's Gate that is built into the walls surrounding Trim. The gate consisted of 2 L-shaped banks with entrance, a 3-meter wide entrance with very substantial foundations, which would have been capable of supporting an impressive superstructure. And so the gate was most certainly at least an imposing 2 stories high. This is, makes it an important additional discovery for what we know about the Cistercians in Ireland. What archaeology is best at is revealing evidence for the lives of the people who lived in this Cistercian enclosure, and in it is the complete Jew's harp, which adds to the oral archaeology of the site, and it sits very well with the tuning pegs that Jeremy Stout and myself found when we were excavating at Bective. It's nice to think that these monks or their lay brothers are making music and to entertain themselves. We also have a sheep's goat tibia, which was used as a dibber, because we know the Cistercians were great farmers and great gardeners. What is significant is that with Stalleen, in addition to excavations at Bective and the most recently published excavations at Bowbeck. We now have 3 Cistercian excavations where we have detailed environmental analysis and detailed animal bone information. And so we are able now to compare and contrast the archaeology of these different types of Cistercian, different forms of Cistercian settlement. So there was a wide variety of plants being utilized in Stalleen. But I think one of the critical points here is that this isolated grange must surely have been farmed by lay brothers, because you have this predominance of oats, which is generally speaking regarded as a lower class of cereal grain. Stands in contrast to what we found beside the monastery at Bective, where wheat predominates, and you can see as in stark contrast to Bowbeck, where wheat reached 86% of the identifiable cereals, showing that not only was grain growing an important part of that economy, but it was also part of the practice of that particular grange collecting wheat for export. So we're able to cumulatively, we're able to say a lot more now about how the Cistercian economy worked. And we are also fortunate that all 3 of the excavations, the bone analysis of all 3 of these excavations was done by Fiona Begg-Lane, and so we can compare them, and we can see that Stalleen had does that live up? No. Anyway, we can see that Stalleen has a very large percentage of cattle bones, and that more or less reflects the reality of Stalleen's location in the heart of the best pasture land in the world. It is in contrast to, for example, Tintern Abbey, where you see a breakdown which is more like you would expect to find in the classical Cistercian house, where if you see Tintern Abbey, which is on the right side of your screen, you can see this is the work of Anne Lynch and her team. You can see that this is more what we would expect. We'd expect less cattle, more sheep, because of course there's the idea that Cistercians are very much part of developing the woolen industry. So there are two?
Sure, but just questions.
Okay, I just have 2 minutes here, but one will do. Okay. The site remained occupied into the post-medieval period. It had corn drying kilns, so production of grain is still an important part of the economy. This is possibly dates into the post-dissolution phases, and finally there is a post-medieval house, which could have been the home of someone recorded in the extents. So last slide of all then is the excavation, the photograph of the excavation report, and this would not have been possible without the Royal Irish Academy's grants for the World Heritage Sites. This just couldn't have been done without it. And I'm going to end with a cliche, if I may. The oft-quoted, too often quoted perhaps, line from Beauties of the Boyne and the Blackwater, where William Wilde writes that the history of Ireland can be traced in the monuments along the Boyne Valley. The excavation at Stalleen has shown that this history can be told within the confines of a single modest rescue excavation. Thanks.